And finally, if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you want to narrow it down, there is a handbook of drought indicators and indices. Mark Swoboda and Brian Fuchs at the Drought Center actually were the principal authors on this. This link goes to a database. This exists as a PDF, but it may actually be easier to in interactive form. It's at a UN database. It kind of lays out the pros and cons of several different drought indices, including how much data they take up front and how hard they are to compute and how useful they are, who's using them. So it's a really nice overview and comparison of all the things you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask about your 50 favorite drought indicators. So the Drought Center has a lot of information related to drought planning. At the individual level, we have managing drought risk on the ranch. Community level, we have drought-ready communities. And then we've also collaborated with the American Planning Association on Planning and Drought, which is Planner's Advisory Service report on kind of on mainstreaming drought planning so that it's not happening in a silo, talking about how you can plan for drought in comprehensive planning and zoning and all that kind of thing. And then more recently, there's this one with APA called Falling Dominoes, looking at drought and cascading hazards. That's also interesting and helpful. And that's written more from a FEMA perspective. They were the funder, and it's got a multi-hazard flavor to it. Then we have a lot of information about planning for drought at a state level. That Don Wilhite's, he was the original founding director of the Drought Center. His work was all about state drought planning. He devised the 10-step drought planning process, which is actually the basis of a lot of UN planning processes and drought-ready communities. And that's been adapted for basin level, and nations around the world have used various variations of the 10-step process. As Cody highlighted on Tuesday, we have a nice collection of plans, of state level plans that deal with drought. Happy to say it's no longer just standalone drought plans. It now includes hazard plans, water plans, and climate plans. And these are just a few of the types of plans, of course, that deal with drought, but you've got to start somewhere if you're trying to do 50 states. Another interesting planning resource, this is very new, we're still in the process really of rolling this out, is there's really sort of a separate section of the website about using scenarios and scenario exercises for drought planning. Deb Bafty, our outreach and education coordinator, was the one who spearheaded this, and there's just a tremendous amount of good information. And they did have, it's really fun. They worked with our designer on this, so it's a lot more visually interesting than some of the older information. And it's got worksheets and ideas about what type of exercise to select for different circumstances. And so it's not only a valuable resource, but it's an engaging resource. That's what I'm trying to say about that. Then the way we collect information about drought impacts has changed over time. And part of the reason this follows next to drought planning is that I take the perspective that the purpose of drought planning is to prevent impacts. So you look to see what your impacts have been and you think, okay, what do we want to have not happen next time? What are we trying to protect from drought? Drought impacts are kind of a pointer to your vulnerabilities. So back in the olden days, say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we thought, well, there should be just a one-stop shop for drought impacts. And that's what the Drought Impact Reporter was originally conceived of to be. And since then, we thought, well, wait a minute, we don't put the SPI and the PDSI and EDI and all of those things on one map. So maybe it actually makes sense not to put all of drought impacts on one map either. So we do, in fact, break it out a lot more different ways now. We still have a Drought Impact Reporter, and it is currently mainly being populated with impacts based on media reports, which is one distinct data stream related to drought impacts. We've also focused on condition monitoring observations. Coco Ross was the original pioneer of condition monitoring. And since then, we've added onto that, built on that with our own condition monitoring that are a little bit more specific to drought, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. We've also got something called the Visual Drought Atlas, which is similar to condition monitoring, only here where it's really focused on landscape photos. This is a project that we inherited from Coco Roz and the Skip RISA. The Skip RISA is headquartered in Oklahoma and Louisiana. This was originally field days, and some of our best contributors to the Visual Drought Atlas are still Coco Roz observers who were well trained and they like submitting photos at regular intervals. We've also got a section for emerging impacts, which shows you other places like the crop comments and several other different sources of information where people may be able to detect emerging drought impacts, but you kind of have to know that you're looking for that. And then we've also got an archive of impact assessments. So if someone does an assessment of what happened during a particular drought, that tends to fade away into gray literature and to be pretty hard to find unless you know it's there. So we are gradually state by state talking to people and saying, have you guys assessed what happened last time you're in drought? I'll put that out there right now for Indiana. Please email me later if you've got an assessment of what happened at some point in the past during Indiana drought. This is gradually getting, it's a constantly growing collection. The most recent additions are about to be some assessments from Georgia and Alabama in the 1950s, even going way back. Okay, so the condition monitoring observer reports are a current effort. They're pretty new. It's been going since 2018, and we're still figuring out how best to protect people's privacy and gather the information that we need. It's a very active, ongoing project. If you would like to encourage people to submit reports about what they're seeing related to drought, please do. Send them to go.unl.edu/Seymour. That goes directly to the reporting form, or Seymour_drought if you would like the project landing page with all of the detail. From that page, you can click on submit a report and go to the survey form. You can view the map of 2021 reports. You can view an archive of past year's reports. You can download a fact sheet about it that tells you how to get started. You can watch the how-to video, which is about 10 minutes long, give or take. And there are also some social media resources, such as this one below, that you can use to encourage people to report what they're seeing in Indiana as drought emerges. It works well on mobile. This effort is based on Esri's Survey 123 platform. So if you want to submit drought-related observations on a mobile app rather than on a desktop, first you go download the app, then you navigate either with the QR code or the link to the survey. It'll prompt you to download it if you haven't done it yet, and then tell it you want to continue without signing in and allow the app to use your location. I'm sorry, those are app downloading steps. And then you go and navigate to the survey, download the survey, and it's pretty straightforward. It'll walk you through several different questions, and then you can go find your dot on the map. The green one in Nebraska, roughly over the D in United States, is one that's Lincoln, Nebraska. That's where I've been submitting reports from for demo purposes, and also so that I will personally have had the Seymour experience. This is one I submitted in February. I like to ride my bike out to this park on the edge of town where they've got native prairie, and you can go visit the bison that live there. So the bison were hanging out in the mud and the melting snow that day. But basically you can literally put your dot on the map. And there's also someone in Greenville, South Carolina, who's observing weekly. They're really kind of an ideal example. I'm managing to make it out to the edge of town every month or so, but they're doing this weekly, showing us a stream and a field, photos of the same thing every single week, so that we'll be able to see how that evolves over the season and over the weather conditions. And finally, Drought Center communications, just briefly, if you want to tune into the Drought Center signal, we are active on Twitter. Every Thursday, we tweet about the Drought Monitor, and often as it's emerging. We've got this hot topic thing that we focus on a little bit more with maps and timelines and a little bit of conversation related to who's doing what. You can go to the Drought Center's publication page to find and subscribe to any of these. We've got a couple of different monthly efforts. The Drought Summary comes out every month with an analysis of where drought has been in the country and what the impacts have been. Then we have Dry Horizons, which is a electronic newsletter for drought planners, kind of circulating ideas about drought monitoring and drought planning that we pick up in the news and in scholarly publications and from drought.gov and in lots of other places. And then we have Droughtscape, which is a quarterly publication. It's a little bit more focused on the Drought Center proper, also on the drought monitoring community to some extent. And again, all of those publications you can access from the publications page of our website. And that's all I got. Be happy to take any questions now or later.
Thanks, Kelly. A lot of great information. I'm glad we kicked off the tools talk with you because the National Drought Mitigation Center certainly provides a lot of information. We'll probably move on to the next speaker because we dedicated some time at the end of this session for questions. But for those of you that are just dying to ask your question before you can forget it, feel free to use the chat if you want it to be a public question, or you can private chat with Kelly. But Kelly, I do have a favor to ask of you and maybe all the presenters throughout the day is when you're done presenting, can you put in the chat some of the key URLs that you shared? I know you went through a lot of different URLs, but maybe some of the highlights to your
Sure.
favorites so that we can maybe copy and paste them so we can try and track them down later.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much. And please stick around because hopefully we'll have questions in a little bit. Next, we'll move over to Mike Ryan with take it away, Ryan, or Mike. Oh,
Thank you, Beth. And just for those who weren't on initially, the Weather Service remains a little bit limited in what we can do with Zoom. So Hans is going to be sharing my screen for me. So I really appreciate that. It's nice to see everyone as much as we can in a virtual setting. Many people that are here on the workshop that I've known for a number of years, gotten to meet some new folks. And my goal here for the next 15 minutes or so is just to show you a little bit about some of the drought service information we provide. I'm going to take it out broader to talk about climate services because drought plays such an important role in that. And I think it helps provide the basis for some of what we're doing. Now, I've got a few of my colleagues on here on the call. I know I saw Tom from Louisville jump on, Crystal Pettit and Brad Harold from my office, and then also Tom Wrench from the RFC over in Wilmington. And so at the end of this talk, if we have a little bit of time, if any of you want to jump in with anything that I may have missed, please feel free to do so. Real quickly before we go on from this slide, I just thought it was really interesting in the conversations we had in our breakout group yesterday, and I think it was this way in a lot of the other breakout groups. 2012 was a popular topic of conversation because that was really the most recent significant drought we had that impacted Indiana. And this picture on the far right was one that Al Shipe, who many of you probably know, has since retired. But Al would go out and observe, take photos of what might be going on along the local streams and with some of the crops and agriculture. This was a picture he took that summer in 2012, I believe down in the Bloomington area, and it was from the middle of July. And when you look at the crops, it looks like it should be harvest time. So really, really kind of hammers home just the impacts that were occurring in 2012. Go ahead, Hans, you can switch to the next slide. So one of the things I just want to mention to broaden out before we bring it back into drought services, I think you need to hit one more there, Hans, just if you can click again. There we go. Many of you may know this already because of the interactions we've had with you in years past, but the Weather Service has transitioned to decision support services as one of their key goals. And this has occurred over the last 5 or 10 years. And in the realm of climate, that applies substantially, and you can see that here with drought, providing information, providing data, providing observations that help all of you make the decisions you need to when it comes to how drought may impact you. And what I like here in building a weather ready nation, this graphic is great because many of the components and partnerships you see down here are represented in this workshop today: emergency management, government, academia, private sector, a component of social science. I don't think we have any broadcast media in here in this meeting, but at least with some of the climate service stuff we do in the state, we do include broadcast media within that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So let me start first of all by talking about the climate services team we have here in the state, which is something that I lead. We began this back in January of 2012, and it really came out of a bunch of collaboration that was developed in a workshop regionally that we had for the area back in the summer of 2011. And the idea was to get a group of people from these different areas of the weather enterprise that I highlighted on the previous slide that serve Indiana with climate needs, and to find a more formal way to communicate, to discuss, to understand how climate services and drought and different components impact each other and impact what we do. We didn't really start out with any specific goals or objectives, but the timeliness was very sound because we became relevant relatively fast, because the drought that we've talked about from 2012 began to develop in the spring and then maximized over the summer, May, June, July, where we were dealing with some of our most significant impacts from that drought. Go ahead to the next slide. So it's taken us, it took a few years to kind of get our legs underneath us, but we are I think a very, very proactive team now. We meet quarterly with conference calls every year with occasional webinars that apply to relevant climate services topics. At this point, we have roughly 35 individuals on our team over multiple agencies. And many of the folks that are in this workshop and on this call this morning are members of our team. And if this is something that you would like to be interested in, certainly you can reach out to me and we'd be happy to include you on this team. This is still, to our knowledge, the first known collaborative state climate services team with core partners in the country. And that's a point of pride for me, and I know for many of the team members on here. We have representatives from the Weather Service from all 6 of the offices that cover the state, and you can see that in the different colors on the map on the right. Indianapolis is in the green, covers most of the central part of the state. Northern Indiana, out of the Kosciuszko County, covers most of that part of the state. But then we have small portions in the orange, the Louisville office, in the gray, the Paducah office, the blue, the Chicago office, and then the Wilmington, Ohio office in the southeast in the yellow. A lot of different things that we discuss in the climate services team, but drought is a major, major component of that. So let's go on ahead to the next slide. And before we get into the dashboard, I just want to highlight who some of our partners are, because there are a lot of the same partners that we have represented here today and over these last couple of days on our workshop. IDHS, Ag Extension in the Purdue community, the Purdue Climate Change Research Center, Midwest Regional Climate Center, Beth and the State Climate Office, but then also components with Silver Jackets and FEMA and media partners and DNR and more and more and more. And I think having this collaborative group together allows us to communicate and on a more formal way, and it really enabled us to, I think, help develop the drought monitor team that Manuela and David Smith lead, that we've referenced, that meets every week. And this is where the drought dashboard came out of that, which I'll discuss here in a second. Go ahead to the next slide. I just want to take 2 more slides here to just help give everyone a feel for how climate services and drought services fit into our strategic plan. A major goal with the impact-based decision support services is finding ways, as you can see here, to reduce the impacts of weather, water, and climate. And water and climate certainly apply to drought, by transforming the way people receive, understand, and act on information. In the 20+ years I've been in the Weather Service, the way we do things, the way we share information, the way we interact has changed drastically. And it's our responsibility to remain on top of that and remain kind of at the cutting edge of being able to understand what your needs are, because your needs when it comes to drought services are likely going to differ from what someone else's needs are or some other organization's needs are. And then being able to tailor that information in a way that allows you to make actionable decisions based on the data you receive. And so one of the things we have listed in the lower section here, the 1.7, is working to improve the accuracy of weather and climate forecasts. And at least from the Weather Service, a lot of that funnels down from the Climate Prediction Center, not only with their 3 and 4 week forecasts, but also their 1 and 3 month forecast outlooks and other information that can help you when you're thinking about where trends may be going in terms of potential for drought conditions, extended dry conditions, or even wet conditions, things like that. Next slide, Hans. And this is a really big one as well. Evolving our workforce to be able to best capture and make use of partnerships within our organization. And that leads to both external and internal partnerships. One thing I think that works really well for our state is we are able to coordinate with the 6 forecast offices that cover the state and the RFC, which has a broader coverage area for the Ohio Valley in general. We have an easy way to be able to interact and communicate internally. And then that helps us in interacting with our external partners. And we do that through the Climate Services team and then this Drought Monitor team, which we'll discuss in a little greater detail here in a minute. But our goal is to expand these public partnerships, these public-private partnerships, and just find these ways to best communicate and focus on the continuous improvements going forward. That's one of our largest responsibilities in working to build a weather-ready nation. Okay, next slide. Let's go ahead and shift gears to the drought dashboard, because I think that's what you really want to hear about. So I want to first start by acknowledging Brad Harold's work, because Brad was really the person that started this process when the team developed the drought team back in 2019 with weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly calls, depending on the status and extent of drought conditions across the state. And Brad would take a lot of time and effort every week in preparing a lot of different data that could be used for our team to discuss and make decisions and recommendations to the Drought Monitor group in Nebraska about where we were in terms of D-level and things of that nature. Out of that, we developed this drought dashboard last summer, which was basically taking Brad's work and putting it into a website where things would update automatically. We relied on the team to help us determine the type of products and the type of data they wanted to have included in there to allow them to make as pronounced a decision they could each week or each month in determining drought status across the state. It's designed to be a one-stop shop for drought information for partners and stakeholders that consistently update. So as I mentioned, it's auto update. So there's always going to be fresh data in there for you to look at. And I did mention this last bullet. It can easily add in new products and graphics upon request. Again, we rely pretty heavily on those members that are on the Drought Monitor team to kind of give us a feel for what they want in there to help make the decisions. But it's a living, breathing website. We can make adjustments on the fly as needed. Next slide. So this is what the dashboard looks like on the right. Now, this is an experimental version that the team has been working with. It's not active on this web address that I list down on the third bullet here yet, but we plan to merge the current drought dashboard with this one here sometime this spring, and this will be what you will see when you go to this web address. What I'll do at the end of the presentation is I'll go into the chat and provide the web address for this specific iteration of the dashboard with the bubble options at the top. Basically, the only difference with the current one that we have live on our website is it just doesn't have those areas basically organized in the bubbles tabs as you see there. It's just kind of a full option. But as you see, we have the ability via this dashboard to immediately look at current drought monitor status, along with links below to go to the drought monitor website and get at some of those tools that Kelly showed here just recently. Any local drought statements that any of the Weather Service offices have out, you can get at this tab here, and I'll discuss that in a minute, because we have certain criteria that will determine when we issue those drought statements. The third tab is recent temperature and precipitation outlooks, just what has fallen over the previous 7 days, over the previous 14, 30, 60, and 120 days to, again, help provide some idea as to how things have evolved in the last 2, 3, 4 months. The impacts tab is great because there are a lot of links there to CocoRAS, which Kelly addressed here in the previous talk. CocoRAS is really critical in some of the data collection that we bring in, and we are blessed to have a very robust CocoRAS program here in the state of Indiana that's led by a number of different folks at the offices throughout the state. Here in Indianapolis, Sam Lashley still does a little bit of work with that, but Andrew White is kind of our core guy who runs that, and he's done a fantastic job getting that together. But we also have other information there. Any sort of crop outlooks and updates, you can link via the impacts page. You can get at extension information updates, which that was something that that Beth created or was able to link up. So the extension agents in the different counties can put in information about what they're seeing in their county, and then we can utilize that information in our discussions each week. Water resource information on the next tab, that's got a lot of information regarding wells, water quality, different items there, again, that can be utilized. And then finally, the one that we're probably most in line with the Weather Service, the forecasts and outlooks tab, which not only has some of that CPC link information I mentioned a few minutes ago, but also any sort of precipitation outlooks over the coming 5-7 days via the Weather Prediction Center. Those maps are updated daily at that link as well. So we have all of that information, and there's also a drought outlook graphic that's produced, I believe, once a month. I mean, it's kind of a seasonal outlook that's produced by CPC, and we have links to that as well at that tab. So that is, again, a very, very nice tool. It's designed, again, as we talked about, to just be a one-stop shop for any sort of information you might need that could help you make your decisions regarding drought status and drought mitigation going down the road. Okay, next slide. I've got a few more slides left before we wrap up. Okay. So I kind of highlighted some of what's at those tabs that I mentioned on the previous slide. Links to specific drought-related data, recent temperature, precipitation trends, and the forecast going forward, water resource data, impacts, and a lot more. And I went ahead and just included, for example, SPI and SPEI maps. That's a link we have there. EDDI maps, NASA sport data, all of that is there for you to look at. And you can see this is a recent example of 7 and 30-day temperature departures from normal. Again, incorporating some of the SPI, SPEI data. And you can just see that it's been warmer and relatively drier across the upper Midwest. And, we had a more average precipitation month in March, but considering some of the deficits we were already carrying, really didn't do enough to alleviate concerns going forward, which I'm sure is something we'll probably discuss at a later time. Okay, next slide. So the drought information statement, I just wanted to touch on this really, really briefly. This is something that every Weather Service office does and produces. And typically, we're going to issue these whenever we have identified D2 levels, which I don't have the D levels in front of me. I believe that's severe drought and greater. But basically, when there are any levels of D2 or greater going up towards D4 that exist within the forecast area. As I mentioned, they're typically issued weekly or bi-weekly. That decision is made by either Crystal or myself for Indianapolis. I'm sure Tom does the same thing for Louisville, and likewise the climate focals for the other offices that cover the state. Now, we can issue this when we have D0 and D1 levels, but that's typically only if one of us were to deem it necessary, if we felt the impacts were substantial enough, even with the D0 and D1 levels, that issuing the drought information statement would be of benefit to our partners. And this is just a brief example of what the drought information statement would look like. It's not the full thing, but you can see a synopsis and summary of impacts, and then we have additional information that would be included in that. I need to go back and look, but I don't believe we've issued a drought information statement in Indy since 2012, since that drought. Or if we have, it was only a handful of statements that we issued going back a few years, but I would need to go back and look to see exactly when that was. So next slide. To just wrap up, I did want to mention just some research efforts that are going on at our office, and this is probably going on at all of the Weather Service offices. Some of you are familiar with what I'm going to mention here. I've termed it, much to the I think the amusement of Sam Lashley, our warning coordination meteorologist, the Lashley Project. This was something that he began when he was up at the Northern Indiana office for many years. And he started looking at extreme rainfall trends across the state. And he has brought that work with him down to Indianapolis, and now has incorporated a couple of us that are involved in that as well, to looking at different things. And at least with some of the initial work that has been done, he has shown increases in frequency of extreme rainfall events over the past few decades, which kind of goes in line with some of the discussions that were talked about over the previous 2 days, and some of the graphics that Corey showed back on Tuesday. He's currently using 20 stations across Indiana. They all have a long period of record that goes well back into the 20th century, I think the early 20th century. And he kind of set his thresholds looking for the number of days at these sites with 2-inch or greater, 3-inch or greater, and 5-inch or greater amounts of precipitation. And there is some plan to update this summer with the help of a student volunteer. Unfortunately, the pandemic and some of the different impacts with that have curtailed some of the forward progress on this project. But the hope is to have it useful for future mitigation and preparedness efforts, at least on the water side of the house. But we've talked about looking at the frequency of excessive dry periods in the future as well, and that's well down the road. But could we apply this methodology in a way that would allow us to maybe look at some future mitigation from the drought side of the house and preparedness ideas? So that's just something that we've discussed, and that's something that has been mentioned not only with the folks at IDHS, but with Beth and her team up at Purdue. So I just wanted to end with that. I believe that's my last slide. Again, this is my email address if you have any questions whatsoever. Thank you very much for having me these last few days. I think this has been great stuff. And Beth, I'll give it back to you. I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything they want to add, but I'm here to take any questions.
Thanks, Mike. This was great. And that drought dashboard has really been helpful, because I know that Brad put in a lot of work for preparing for those weekly calls by kind of cutting and pasting and putting it in, and certainly was helpful. But the dashboard has certainly simplified that process, but also allowed us to not have to wait until the Monday call if we wanted to look at any of the products in the meantime. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to Molly, and hopefully we'll still have a few minutes at the end to ask some questions before the break. So I do apologize to the other representatives from the National Weather Service River Forecast Center offices. But Molly, if you want to take it away and show us the different resources and tools on drought.gov.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me okay and see my screen?
I can do both.
Okay. And I don't know what this Pinterest thing is. Oh, I don't know if you guys could see that. Interesting. Okay. Hi again, everyone. I'm excited to showcase our new drought.gov website today. I decided to kind of give you a little brief demo of the website as opposed to a PowerPoint. So Hopefully everything is working as it should. But NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, we host the government's website for drought resources. It's called the U.S. Drought Portal, and it's really meant to be a clearinghouse of drought information for the country. We recently, in January of this year, just launched a brand new website that's completely redesigned. It offers a lot more information. If you're familiar with the old drought.gov website, that definitely had its issues. So we are definitely excited about this new website. And the new drought.gov features a lot of updated content and new content as well. There's a lot more interactive features, and the goal is to hopefully provide access to information that you can use to make better decisions, to have them in an easy to understand way, and just really be able to provide information for all aspects of a drought early warning system, from monitoring to outlooks to planning, and other things like that. So I'm just going to kind of do a brief overview of the website and then dive into a couple of pages that I think might be of interest to this group. But there's definitely a lot of information, so I encourage you to explore on your own. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always get in touch with me. In terms of the navigation, we have first here on the left a data and maps section. So if you're looking for information on current conditions, drought impacts, outlooks and forecasts, this is where you would find it. We also have data and maps organized by various topics. So if you're interested in looking at water supply data and maps, you would go to this page here. And we also have other things like soil moisture, fire, public health, for instance. I'm just going to quickly go to the water supply page. So each of these pages has a different interactive map here that you can look at. For the water supply, we have the stream flow overlaid with the drought monitor, and also the 7-day precipitation forecast as well. I did want to note that any of these blue boxes that you see that really provide sort of an overlay of data, this is actually going to be turned into an interactive GIS map here soon. Right now, you can't click on it and go to the different page, but eventually you will be able to and layer different data sets all together. We also have selected resources for the various topics. So again, this is the water supply page, and we have some of the topics, or I'm sorry, the data resources that would be helpful for water supply. Going back to the navigation here, one of the newest features is also by sector information. So if you're interested in learning more about various sectors and how drought impacts that sector, and also specific resources and information for that sector, all of these pages have a lot of information. Let's see, why don't we go to ecosystems? So this page provides ecological regions in drought. So we overlay here forests, prairies, deserts, Mediterranean, different types of ecosystems with the drought monitor. And again, this is more text-based, where it really talks about that sector and how drought impacts the sector. So again, these are meant to be not only resources to hopefully guide you to the correct data that you're looking for or other information, but also an educational component as well to these. The by location is one of the new features of drought.gov is that you can explore drought at various scales, all the way from international scale down to your local zip code. I'm going to dive into these local pages here in a little bit, but you can search your zip code here. You can also search for state, and all of these pages are interconnected. So you can go down to your county on the state page, or even further down to the local scale. And we also have the drought early warning system pages, which I'll show here in just a second as well. The research and learn section is also completely new. And this really is a lot of, Drought 101, trying to describe the different topics related to drought. If you're interested in sharing information on the basics of drought, or maybe you yourself wants to learn more about things like flash drought, we have pages that you can dive a little bit more into these different topics that are fairly popular in the drought world. So again, just sort of some text education based and also resources on these various topics. And on the Research and Learn, you can also access a lot of our information of the science that we're funding. NIDIS, we are located within NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, OAR. And so a lot of what we do is support research in the drought world. So we do have a page here where it talks about the different research that we're funding and the avenues that we fund it through. So whether you are looking to apply for funding yourself or just interested in knowing more about the research that we are supporting right now, these little research profiles with this microscope here, these show different projects. This is just highlighting 9 in particular, but I'll also show you on the Midwest Drought Early Warning System page that we have specific projects highlighted for the Midwest as well. And then finally, the About page. This is kind of your basic, what is NIDIS, who we are, what is Drought Early Warning. I find that these 2 resources here, Drought Early Warning and Drought Early Warning Activities, it's really educational if you are interested in just learning more about what is Drought Early Warning in particular. And then we also have pages, and we're going to be doing more in terms of tribal specific pages. So we do have a tribal engagement outreach strategy, and we will be developing reservation specific pages in the by location section here soon. Okay, so I wanted to dive a little bit more into this local information. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Indiana page. So if you click on by location, oops, not Kentucky, let's see, there we go, Indiana. The state pages show you a quick snapshot of, what the drought monitor looks like in your area, and also, what it looked like last week and last month, so you can get a picture of how conditions have been changing. We also have, well, actually, I wanted to show one thing really quick here. Mike was just talking about the National Weather Service drought information statements, and this is actually a brand new web page that we launched just this week on drought.gov, where underneath the banner here, if there is a drought information statement from the National Weather Service, it will be linked here. I just wanted to open up the page since there's not an active one in Indiana right now. I wanted to show you what this page looks like. So this provides access to certain offices that have issued a statement. So you can see here on the map where they are. And then if you click on one in particular, it pops you down to this where it actually has it pre-populated. So we worked with the National Weather Service Climate Services Program to get these integrated into drought.gov. So these are available through our website if you're interested. And again, you can see if they're active through the state page. Another thing that we have that's a new feature is being able to explore historical conditions in various locations. So this is the state snapshot of the US Drought Monitor, but you can actually also go back to 1895 using SPI data from NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information. And you can even here, if you see this time period, you can select different periods. So this is 1935 to 1945. So if you wanted to drill down to a certain time period, you can do that as well. And we actually also have paleoclimate data on here too. Again, if you wanted to drill down to a certain time period, let's say 1300, this is paleoclimate data from NCEI as well. So it's, I think, one of the only places you can get this information online, and I just, find it really interesting to be able to look back that far. Okay, so next I wanted to go to a county in Indiana. So once again, you can access the county page from the by location. You can also get to it from the state page. You can either click on the county here and go straight to it, or below there is this drop-down menu where you can go to the county. Let's go ahead and go to one that actually has some drought at the moment. The drought pages for the counties have a lot of great information. First, I did want to note that for either a zip code or a county, you can sign up for alerts. So if your location that you signed up for has changed status on the US Drought Monitor, it will send you an email with that information. I recently had signed up for Champaign, Illinois, where I am, and as we went from D1 down to currently we don't have any dry conditions, I continued to get emails notifying me of that change. The goal is to be able to offer this for other indicators as well. So the user could specifically sign up for, different precipitation deficits or, other indicators of drought that you might be interested in. So this shows quick stats about how many people are affected by drought, and how sort of drought has looked over the last little bit here and where it ranks, for instance. So in this county, it was the 38th driest February in 2021 over the past 127 years. So a lot of neat information at the local scale. Again, you can get the US Drought Monitor information, temperature departures from normal from the last 30 days, precipitation departures. And then we also have things like drought indicator blends. We have a short-term and a long-term blend that NIDIS has developed in partnership with the Climate Engine resources. And we also, see, this is a live demo. Of course, there has to be something that goes wrong. It was just working earlier. Let's see, let me try to reload it here. So this is showing agriculture, and you can look at what is grown in the county and some of the different statistics on what percent are in drought. We also have water supply, so we overlay the USGS stream gauges, and we also include the 1-month precipitation outlook. You can zoom out if you're interested to get more information on exactly what's expected over the next month. And we also have public health information. So the social vulnerability index is overlaid with a drought monitor, as well as heat warnings, which of course we don't have any at the moment. We also have outlook information. So Mike mentioned that this is available on their Indiana dashboard, and we also link to those here. We have, of course, the CPC outlooks, the monthly seasonal drought outlooks, but also other experimental outlooks like the evaporative drought demand index outlook, which has just recently been developed. And I did want to show really quickly, going back up, kind of going out of the local pages, the outlooks and forecast page, we step through by looking at the more, the week ahead and what the CPC and National Weather Service is predicting. And we also offer a lot of different outlooks and forecasts, and some that are actually experimental from the CPC. So I think that's really interesting to keep an eye on. We have both the monthly drought outlook and the seasonal, but also the tendency forecast, which is an experimental project or product right now, and this potential flash drought product from the CPC. And I'll mention that NIDIS actually has been working really closely with CPC to improve drought outlooks here over the next 3 to 5 years. So we are doing a fairly large research project with them and really trying to make some modeling improvements that will hopefully increase the skill of the drought outlooks that are available through CPC. Okay, so the last thing I just wanted to mention, I am putting in Champaign zip code. I should have found out an Indiana one before doing this. But you can look at your local area. And again, it provides really interesting information about drought indicators. We have the drought monitor. We also are pulling this from the Climate Toolbox Water Watcher. So it shows you for a specific location what other indicators look like as well. So you'll see that it doesn't always match up. And that is one of the things that makes drought somewhat confusing, is that some indicators might be showing drought and others might not. So again, that's sort of one of the complications of the drought monitor and trying to figure out, these authors trying to figure out exactly what the conditions are. It's not an easy job. And again, the drought indicators and future conditions. Okay, just a couple more things to show you here. I did want to mention, by going to the historical page, I think this tool is really neat. You can not only look at a time series of drought, but you can actually slide this and see spatially what the drought looked like. So if we go to around, I guess this was kind of the peak of the 2012 drought in this area, you can look at the time series and also see what it looks like across the country. And you can do this as well for the historical data. So if you wanted to look at 1895 to the present, and then also for the paleoclimate data. And any of these blue boxes, you can actually take a screenshot of the map and you can then pull that into presentations or anything. So that is a really neat feature, being able to look at the historical conditions. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show you really quickly is the Midwest News page. So I will navigate here to the Midwest Drought Early Warning System page, which the coordinators really helped pull this together based on a lot of the feedback that we heard from people over the last few years of what they would like to see on a regional page. We start out here by showing links to the strategic plan. And then really one thing that's very important is this is where you would find the latest drought status updates that we've issued, which we just issued one last Friday for the North Central region. So these are sent out by email through the Midwest News listserv as well, if you're interested in getting those. But it really just highlights some of the key points of conditions. Right now, there's a lot of issues further out in the Great Plains, so it was more focused on that, but we also pointed out how there has been some increased dryness in the Great Lakes Basin and some expanding drought. So these will probably be issued here pretty frequently coming up, maybe once a month, just to provide conditions. There's also regional webinars that you can attend. There's one next Thursday. So we're trying to stagger these updates versus the webinars that happen, just to provide information every other week. So going back really quick to the Midwest page, one of the neat new features is this regional activities. So you will see here that we actually, one of the first activities we have highlighted is the Central Indiana Water Study. So this table here is meant to highlight our partner efforts. So things that are going on across the Midwest related to drought. And so these can be submitted by anyone. It says to email me if you want to add something to the list, but you can search by location. Let's see what else pops up for Indiana. There's quite a bit. We have a few different research projects. Let me just click on this one here. So the Central Indiana Water Study, this just gives you kind of a quick blurb of information, who's involved, and then if there is a website to go to, we click to that. So if you have any projects or activities going on that you would like highlighted in drought.gov, please email me and I would be happy to work with you to add these to the table. And the goal of this table is to really showcase what's going on, to learn from one another, and to be able to, share information easily. And finally, these resources, these were sort of handpicked by me and with some other partners to really highlight those monitoring resources, planning, prediction that are useful for the Midwest. So I have links to the Midwestern Regional Climate Center's Climate Watch, some Midwest specific maps for evapotranspiration, and other resources like the Drought Impacts Toolkit that Kelly showcased earlier. So there's a lot of information on these tabs, and I try to keep it as up to date as I can. And finally, the research, this is the page I mentioned before. We have a lot of great research going on in the Midwest, trying to better understand drought, trying to understand, for instance, how to best use the Evaporative Drought Demand Index, EDI, in the region. So I encourage you to look at these and, if you're interested in receiving information from these research projects, we will be sending those out through the Midwest News Network if you would like to look at them. Okay, I think that is it. And I'm sorry if I went over time, hopefully not. But Beth, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Molly. This drought.gov, you could certainly put the URL in the chat, but it's drought.gov. It's just so easy to remember.
Yes.
In that sense, I know when it was launched earlier this year, I've had it on my to-do list to look through it and explore it, and I just never got around it. So I was looking forward to your presentation because now I can somewhat cross it off my list and okay, now I know it's on this drought.gov. So we are running a little bit behind time, but those three presentations that we just heard were pretty thick with information and details and comments. So we'll just push things back a little bit, maybe have an abridged break, but I did want to open up time right now for about 10 minutes to see if there's anyone who has any questions for Kelly, Mike, or Molly. And then certainly if other representatives from NOAA Weather Service would like to chip in terms of what they have going on, then please feel free to do so. I think you can either raise your hand. I don't know if you can raise your hand actually, or if you just want to unmute, ask a question, or put it in the chat. We'd love to.
I was just going to add, Beth, I put it in the chat. I was looking through the experimental version of the drought dashboard I showed, and I'm ashamed to say that we don't have the link to drought.gov and NIDIS that Molly showed on there. And so that might have just been a little oversight. We will get that resolved. Because the information you showed, Molly, was fantastic.
Great.
So much information there.
I'm glad to hear that. And I also wanted to mention too that we are continuing to talk about phase 2 of drought.gov. So if there's things, the state pages we want to improve. So if there are certain things that you guys would like to see on the state page, we're actually having calls next week to brainstorm. So I'm more than open to feedback. And we also have like a user feedback survey if you're interested in providing feedback on the website.
Great. Anyone have questions for Kelly concerning the Drought Mitigation Center and all the different tools and products that they were offering? Kelly, I have a question, if you don't mind. Would you be willing to just say a few words about, since so many people in the Mentimeter survey said they use the drought monitor to get information. Can you give kind of a quick elevator speech on really how does that work? What goes into that? How subjective is it? Who's actually making the decisions every week to draw the map the way they do?
Sure. And there is a good page on the Drought Monitor website called, I think it's About the USDM, something like that, that does describe the process in more detail. The really high level description is that there's a rotating team of about, I think it's about 12 authors, including a few at the Drought Center, and the rest are with NOAA and USDA. Each author typically takes a shift of about 2 weeks. They review tons of different data. Literally, I mean, it could literally be 50 or 60 different data sources. Typically, they each probably have their go-to sources. That's not that many to keep it manageable. But depending on the part of the country and different relevant data, different quality of data in different parts of the country, they'll kind of look at this patchwork of objective data. Precipitation temperature, a lot of standardized precipitation index, Palmer drought severity index. They also look at impacts. And there's a data cutoff at 7:30 on Tuesday mornings, I believe. And so if it hasn't happened by then, it doesn't count for the week. So then they spend really a couple of very intensive days, excuse me, evaluating what that says and reconciling any differences in the data. And there's this very lively discussion on the Drought Monitor listserv. I don't know how many of you have any experience with that, but boy, it fills up your inbox if you're on that list. And it's a really interesting and active community of drought professionals that are involved in assessing drought, providing this local input to how that process works. And then they send out successive drafts of the map, they get comments on it, and it comes out every Thursday morning at 7:30. Is that about it?
Yeah. No, that was great. I'm trying to keep up with the chat. It looks like Sarah Hudson has made some recommendations for some pages. Does anyone else have any questions for Kelly?
Hey, Beth, can I add just one real quick comment about the drought monitor? It really is an interesting combination of a map of, it's not just objective data. It is trying to match objective data with what we're hearing from people on the ground. And it's a very interesting fusing process. but those on-ground reports, which Kelly talked about, and I think Molly talked a little bit about too, are incredibly important as to what's happening on the ground, how are things being impacted on the ground by drought, and trying to match those up with what the numbers say. And that's really critically important as to what goes on in the drought monitor process.
Great. I did want to ask this question that Sarah raised, and I don't know if it was answered later. It was earlier on. She said that she sees that Indiana has a www.indiana.gov/drought page, but didn't have all the links. So does anyone want to answer that question who might know a little bit more about that page? Awkward.
Perhaps we could wade into that a little bit, Beth. I mean, it's coming to fruition, and each of the, for example, DNR and DHS have links on their pages, and then their pages are also linked to the Indiana.gov. But we've got a ways to go with getting all that information. And I did post this workshop should provide a good deal of push and energy to move in a direction now, because we've had these amazing talks with people identifying the richness of what's out there already. So without recreating the wheel, the linkages seem to be the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a sense, I think one could argue there's a lot of redundancy between all of these different websites, but at the same time, they're serving perhaps different audiences. So just because, state government has a drought page doesn't mean the Weather Service shouldn't have their drought page, and drought.gov shouldn't exist.
Exactly.
It's very useful and certainly things to discover in all of them that maybe isn't captured everywhere. Any other questions about what we heard in this morning session, this first session? It's always a quiet group. I don't know.
Hey, Beth, this is Bob Barr.
Yeah,
I just want to chime in and say that the talks this morning have been excellent. Thanks to all.
Oh, how kind of you, Bob. And thank you to the presenters. Maybe that's a good thing to end on now for the break. So I propose we take a 15-minute break, which would have us reconvening at 10:35. And we have another round of great speakers who will hone in a little bit more onto the products of their agencies. So enjoy your 15 minutes, hug a puppy, step away from the monitor, give your eyes a break, and we'll see you back shortly.
What time did you say that?
15 minutes, so 10:35.
Okay, great.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope the break was good. You were able to step away, refresh yourself, stretch the legs. This is the second part of the two-part series of tools from agency partners that can help us better prepare for drought. The first one will be from the USGS, followed by a presentation by USDA, and then finally a presentation from the Army Corps of Engineers. So our first presentation is being offered by Jeff Woods and Sean Naylor with the USGS, and I will let you guys take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, we're going to cover some of the tools that the USGS has and kind of what their application is when it comes to drought planning and even response as well. And so, Sean, if you can go to the next slide, we'll just discuss these kind of tools are listed here that we're going to talk about, and then Sean will kind of wrap things up with a larger study that the USGS is involved in that may have some application or at least interest to the larger group. So I'm going to start with the National Water Dashboard. This is a tool that was rolled out probably about 2 to 3 months ago, and it really is something that has needed to come for quite a while as far as data presentation for our ongoing monitoring. In the past, the website that we had used was pretty dated. So this one's really a lot more slick. We're doing screen captures here just to kind of have slides available for people. But if you do want some type of a demonstration, we could always do that later as well. This is something that if you're on the Silver Jackets, you'll probably be familiar with seeing. And so it's going to allow you to put various layers onto a map where all of our active monitoring is, and you can kind of parse that out by specific monitoring types like stream gauges or groundwater wells, or you can put several of those on top of each other and you'll get the locations for that. Additionally, you're going to be also able to, I don't know, Sean, if there's another part of the slide or not that's visible. It's like some of it's missing, but yeah, thanks. You're going to be able to see the hydrograph, the gauge location, and then if you go to the next slide, please, Sean, we have some new applications that are part of the hydrograph that you can use now to kind of compare what things look like in the previous year. So pop up a hydrograph and it'll show what the conditions were last year versus the current conditions. And then you can also display the median calculation for either daily gauge height or daily flows, depending on what you're looking at for the surface water or the groundwater sites. So this is kind of a nice tool to be able to kind of see where you're at and where we're at as at a particular site relative to long-term conditions. Next slide, please. You can also overlay the drought monitor on the map and get a better idea of geographically where some of the sites are sitting relative to current conditions. This only shows current conditions, so you can't kind of scroll back in the past like you could with the previous tools that have been shown, but at least it gives you something to work with when you're doing something on the current side of things. And then there's other layers that you can add in as well based on different weather conditions you might be interested in, as well as hydrologic maps. So more enhanced views of rivers. We have major aquifers as a layer and basins as well that could be put onto this. Next slide, please. Our other website has been around for quite a while, the Water Watch website. This one really provides some of the statistical analysis that's associated with the stream gauging across the country. And the areas kind of that are germane to this group have been highlighted in the screen capture on the left side here with either the drought link or the toolkit links. And from the toolkit in particular, you can create several different types of plots to kind of visualize where current conditions are, as well as what they've been in the past. And so you can do that at a state level, or you can actually zoom it down to an individual gauge as well. So depending on where your interest may lie, you can kind of take a look and see where current conditions are relative to the period of record, either at the location or for the entire state. And so this shows the duration hydrograph back in 2012 when we experienced our drought, with the dark line being the actual data collected that particular year and where it showed up relative to the percentile classes for the overall period of record data that we've collected. And you can also create other plots, short-term ones like the 45-day example we have here on the right side, as well as some longer-term ones as well. Again, you can separate these by state level or individual gauge level and get an idea of where we're at as far as either wet or dry conditions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this over to Sean now, and he will cover the groundwater side of things.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus in on some of the groundwater, like Jeff said, some of the groundwater related interactive maps that we have on the groundwater watch page that's been around for a while. So you have a number of options, for these different interactive maps. You can look at, all the active groundwater sites, monitoring sites that USGS has in one map. So this is going to include the real-time monitoring sites, sites where we're getting just discrete measurements, maybe quarterly per year, and sites that have continuous records, but are not being broadcasted real time. We have a climate response network, which is a subset of real-time monitoring wells, where the wells have been kind of cherry picked, and these are the ones that aren't impacted by pumping influences And also these are wells that have been identified that don't go dry during droughts. And then of course, you know, you can look at the map that has just the real-time wells. And then we also have this interactive map if you really want to hone in on wells that are currently demonstrating dry conditions. These wells, I think, are only those with the current readings that are below the 30th percentile class. So like Jeff said, you know, you can zoom in to different scales. You can, if you click on Indiana, you'll zoom in and only see the monitoring wells that are currently in Indiana. So as an example, for a monitoring well that we can click on and zoom in, I chose this one appropriately located in Wells County, Indiana. And so when you do that, you know, you can see the red line is the groundwater hydrograph. And this top plot is showing that hydrograph relative to the percentile classes that are based on the historic records. And so we can see here, you know, the things are pretty dry right now in this aquifer. Currently, you know, this is pulled just a couple days ago, I think. So we're into April and currently in the 10th or lower percentile class. On each one of these pages also, there's another plot. The green line is going to show the historical daily median value. And so we're seeing the hydrograph that's being, you know, plotted relative to that. And so we see, you know, we're below the historical medians currently with this, this location. And you also note that we're actually showing quality assurance that's being done on these data. The red line indicates that this is provisional data. And whereas the blue portion of the line has undergone the complete quality assurance protocols. So kind of just gives you an idea of the amount of work, data curation that goes into providing these data by the USGS. So kind of want to just highlight a couple of different projects that the USGS is working on. One project in the state of Kentucky right now with the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Water Science Center. Jeff and I have some colleagues that have teamed up with the Kentucky Agriculture Development Board and tried to come up with kind of an interactive map in response to the Kentucky Drought Mitigation and Response Plan that was completed in 2008. So that plan identifies, you know, 4 key parameters that the folks in Kentucky are very interested in with regard to drought. And so a couple of our colleagues worked with those guys to develop an interactive map that's going to focus on, you know, precipitation, stream flow, groundwater levels, and crop moisture index data. So this map is updating county scale data on a weekly basis. And if we kind of zoom in, you know, you can go to each county, and the upper right square within the box, county box, is going to give us the current stream flow data. So, you know, rather than, you know, having to go to the Water Watch webpage for Kentucky, you can kind of have these 4 parameters that are summarized for a county. Another nationwide effort that the USGS is currently undertaking is the Integrated Water Availability Assessments Project. So this is just getting underway. But when it's completed, what this project will do is it'll, in real time, evaluate current water supply and demand, and in fact, multiple factors that are influencing current availability. There'll also be components of evaluating long-term trends in water availability and causes. So the focus here is mostly looking at hydrologic drought and ecological drought. So, you know, in-stream flows, and that'll be a kind of a key component that it'll be looking at. The national tools, like I said, will effectively provide a real-time water census at the Huck 12 watershed scale. And so a Huck 12 watershed is typically approximately around 40 square miles. So I've listed some of our colleagues at the national level here that are currently working to develop all these tools. And Pat Lambert recently provided us with kind of some concept maps that are right now being developed. So this is the nationwide water census. This was made live this is from December of 2020. And so this is directly linked to the National Water Dashboard that Jeff spoke about earlier. And from a water use standpoint, the census will eventually integrate water use data that we have at the national level that considers irrigation uses, public supply uses, and also thermoelectric applications. So this is something that we're really excited about because it's going to be a great tool, I think, for really understanding water availability in real time. And so there's that effort, the national effort. You know, they're also going to be focusing in on some target watersheds, and of course the Delaware River Basin out east is where a lot of the water supply for New York City comes from. So that was kind of why that basin was chosen early on. More recently, we learned that the Illinois River Basin is going to be a focus basin. And so we can see on this map, you know, includes a portion of northwestern Indiana. So yeah, that work will begin in 2022, and we'll provide some higher resolution products. So yeah, we'll share these slides, and just kind of wanted to throw in one final slide here that'll have links to all these web pages and web tools.
And I did add those links to the chat as well.
Thanks, Jeff and Sean. As with the previous session, we'll hold questions off until all three presentations have been done. But if people are yearning to get their question out or private chat, please feel free to do so. Unless you guys have any final words, I didn't want to presume that you weren't done. You were done? Okay. All right. I had that awkward moment of, did I just interrupt you guys? I am so sorry. All right, next up we have Nathaniel Warinsky with USDA, who's going to give a presentation from USDA NAS perspectives, how they might communicate drought, and we're really excited to have him here. He's relatively new in this position, so certainly welcome, Nathaniel, to the state and program, and we look forward to hearing more about what's going on.
Thank you, Beth. As Beth mentioned, I am new. I am the Indiana State Statistician for USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. My contact information is up on this first slide. I have been in this position for about 2 months now. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about various things with USDA. So I'm glad there's other USDA representatives on this meeting because I'm not an expert in other agencies, but I'll start with what NASA is and what they have to offer. Then I'll touch a little bit about a couple other agencies. So NASA is the statistical arm of USDA. We provide data to help you work smarter. And by you, I mean the general public, and in this particular case, help you guys in understanding the effects of drought or other weather events. I know Beth has mentioned that sometimes you get a lot of rain after a drought, and then you get that flash flood, and we've seen that in various places throughout the country. What we don't do is give commentary. So we're not going to say, we're expecting this yield, so do this, for example. So the question is how does this affect you? Or how does this affect the people who give us data or the data users? One question is what trends do you guys see? So if we're not getting a lot of water, what are the yields or what happens to livestock inventory? And how would you then react to it? What decisions are we going to make to help mitigate some of these issues beforehand? How do we combat lower yields? Is there anything that can be done to do that? Is there anything that we can keep from selling off livestock early? Those are some of the questions that we do, that our data allows you to look at. So what is the data that we have available so that you can make those decisions? And first off, our most popular report is our crop progress report. It comes out on a national basis every Monday at 4 o'clock Eastern. And states also have a state release. It includes information such as subsoil and topsoil moisture percentages as adequate, surplus, and so on. But it also gives us information about the stage of the crop is in, how much is planted, emerged, headed, harvested. It also gives us information about the condition, poor, fair, good, or excellent, so that we can make decisions on what we need to do about our crop throughout the growing season. Also, every month we have a crop production report. This comes out between the 9th and the 12th of each month. And during the growing season, we have the yield and productions of our various crops throughout the country, and specifically Indiana. And coming up in May, we'll have the small grains in that. And then coming up in August, we'll start including the row crops. And that will give us an indication of what we expect the yield and production of these given crops to be. Now, we do it on a monthly basis because the conditions, weather, economic, and other such conditions can change quickly. And we want to be able to get you that information out as quickly as possible. The information for this release, for the crop production release, comes from our ag yield survey, which goes directly to the farmers, and also our objective yield survey. Now, objective yield, our enumerators going to the field, do counts from the crops, and then we have a model in which we're able to estimate the projected yield and production from that. We also have our crop production report, our annual report, that comes out end of January. That focuses on our row crop crops, corn, soybeans, and such. It also includes hay, and this includes the yield and production for the planted and harvested acres for the previous year. This is the final one with that data after doing the crop production reports throughout the year. Similarly, we have the small grain summary, which comes out into September, which likewise gives planted, harvested, yield and production numbers. Both of these, if drought or other weather events has an effect on the crop. We could see it in the yield and also in how much or how little is harvested compared to how much is planted. I've included our grain stocks reports. Those come out on a quarterly basis. We just had it come out March 31st, and they come out every quarter at the end of the month, that given month. So March, June, September, December. And does this have a direct relationship to the drought or other weather events? No, but if farmers produce less, well, the stocks are going to be less later on in subsequent quarters. Agricultural prices, we have that at the end of each month as well. This is on a national basis, so we don't get the full picture for Indiana on the effect of prices. One thing we did talk about in these meetings the last couple of days is that drought has an effect going on beyond just the farmer or to the, but it goes on to the individual, what they're actually paying. These are the prices that the farmers are paid for what they produce. We also have county estimates where we do county estimates for some livestock and crops within the state on a county level. So how much acres were planted in a given crop, how many acres were harvested in yield and production. So we can see what happens on a more local level. And we can see the effects when we break it down to the local level on what various conditions might have on it. I'm going to bring up livestock. I got a couple highlighted here. Cattle we do that survey and that release in January and July, and sheep and goats is January. We also do hogs on a quarterly basis in December, March, September, and September. I'm going to start all over. I don't think I said it that quite right. March, June, September, and December is when that is done. And we talked about the effects of drought. If we have no pasture, are they selling them off? And it's not just drought, but it's also other weather events. I know there is a few of us in the plains who have presented. Some of us remember 2019, and I know that had effects in other states that they were, it was prognosed that so many head of cattle were lost during severe floods out here that we were able to put out data to give a better idea of how much cattle were actually lost in between January and July of 2019 to also help producers make appropriate decisions. And also in these decisions, it helps allow other agencies, policymakers make decisions based off of the current weather conditions or the weather conditions that the farmers had faced. NASA does have some partnerships with other agencies. They're, once again, not necessarily weather specific, but if you look at the data series, you'll be able to see how the weather has played into it. The first one that I'm going to bring up is the Agricultural Resource Management Survey. We do this with the Economic Research Service every year. It is a heavy-duty economic survey. Once again, it doesn't focus on weather, but with the in-depth questions asking about how much electricity, how much they paid for irrigation, things like that, those type of expense questions, as well as what they made from selling their commodities. If we look at a time series and overlay that with weather data, could we see the economic effect of farmers, on the ranchers? We've also participated with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in doing the Conservation Effects Assessment Project. A few years ago, when I was in our headquarters unit, I did some training of our enumerators in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana enumerators, and training them how to conduct the survey. It focuses on pesticide applications, fertilizer applications, field operations, tilling, planting, and things like that. So it's, once again, it's not a specific weather survey, but while they're doing the training, NRCS also had a representative to help with training. She pointed out how many other sources in this project that they use to put together their reports based off of that. And they do use weather data. Very interesting. I'm going back up. We do have other partnerships that we deal with. For example, we have partnerships throughout the country with land-grant universities here in Indiana, Purdue. We had a couple people present today during this week from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, the partnership there in Nebraska is with them, and also with state departments of agriculture. And just because we don't have a partnership with you doesn't mean that others don't use the data as well. We've seen data from NAS referenced in the news. If you hear USDA says so much corn was produced or so much soybeans was produced, generally speaking, it would be coming from NAS, but we are moving into the one USDA. I'm going to touch on Farm Service Agency. Once again, not necessarily all drought related. They have conservation program, particularly conservation reserve program. Once again, that doesn't necessarily relate to drought or weather. It's some of what you do could help in erosion and other issues that could come about this. You can also go to their website and sign up for emails to receive information about payments related to weather and other issues related to that. They also have a list of disaster designations. This is an example of it. I pulled this actually off a week ago as I was preparing, and this is showing the secretarial drought designations as of March 31st, so about a week ago. Real quick, Risk Management Agency. Some of us are familiar with that. They do the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, or they oversee it. They also have some tools. I'll put that in the chat as suggested tools on risk management and how to help mitigate some of the risks that farmers do have to deal with. And I'll briefly touch on the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Once again, I'm not an expert on this. I know I've seen a couple NRCS representatives on here. So if you have questions, I might defer those type of questions to them. They have Conservation Technical Assistance Program where they give technical advice on what's the word I'm looking for? Conservation practices. And also financial assistance to put into place conservation practices. The Farm Bill is always something big and important that's discussed quite a bit every time the Farm Bill is debated in Congress. It's about every 4 to 5 years. The last one was 2018, before that 2014. And there's been previous ones, and they have programs coming from the Farm Bill that they administer that relate to conservation practices. And some of them is EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program, AMA, Agricultural Marketing Assistance Program, ACEPA, ACEP, I believe is how they say it, Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Once again, these relate to conservation programs, not necessarily to weather or drought or floods, but ways in which we can conserve our resources so that when we do face such, that hopefully we are in a better position to come through with it. Once again, this is my contact information and where you can get some of our data, and also Indiana specific data. I'll follow the suggestions and put those in the chat.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Yeah, USDA seems to have lots of branches and lots of information, and glad you had the links at the end, because I know I signed up for emails from NAS on a variety of those topics that you gave, and some of them really do include some weather information and drought. So it's interesting to read how USDA is looking at the connection between weather and all the other aspects of agriculture. So our last presentation is with from Adam Conley from the Army Corps of Engineers. Adam?
Yep. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Looks good.
All right, cool. There we go. So, Corps of Engineers, we have 8 flood control reservoirs in the state of Indiana. 3 of them in the northern part of the state are operated by our Chicago district. It's the Eroush, Salamone, and Mississinawa. And the remaining 5 are kind of in the middle to the southern part of the state. We got Cagles Mills, CM Hardin, Monroe Lake, Toka Lake's kind of in the southern part there, and then Brookville Lake is on the east boundary with Ohio. And so each of our projects has an approved operating plan or approved operating criteria, and that operating criteria includes a minimum release that is never reduced without additional federal, state, and local coordination. So that's our reservoir projects in the state of Indiana. 3 of those projects have water supply agreements in place. Monroe Lake, which is kind of in the center part of the state. Patoka Lake, again, is in the southern, and Brookville Lake was on that eastern boundary with Ohio. And so all of those water supply agreements are with the state of Indiana. And you can see on the slide the volume or the yield of water supply that each of those agreements include. And I just took a quote out of one of the agreements. We basically allocate a block of storage from the winter pool at each of these projects down to a certain elevation. And the state has the right to withdraw all that all the way down to that minimum elevation, and they can do whatever they want with that. So these projects were originally, I think all 3 of these were originally designed with that water supply aspect in mind. So I said we had 8. What about the other 5? The other 5 do not have a water supply agreement, and they're not actually congressionally authorized for water supply. So a lot of times when Corps of Engineers dams are designed and built, they might have congressional authorization for water supply, but if not, that's not one of their authorized operating purposes. So what does that mean? In terms of drought, even though these projects don't have, these 5 projects don't have a water supply agreement in place, there is a provision in the 1944 Flood Control Act, which basically allows users to get up to a 1-year permit to temporarily withdraw water from these projects. And so the use of that water has to be for domestic, municipal, or industrial purposes. And generally, when these agreements are signed, the Corps prefers that we work with a local, a state entity, not individual users. Not a particular farmer, or we want to work with kind of the local and state levels, and then based on that act, we are required to charge some fee, and that's a minimum of $50 per agreement. And I believe that actually can be increased depending on the amount of the water withdrawal. So within Louisville, the authority to permit these temporary withdrawals. If it's up to 100 acre-feet of storage, our district commander can approve that. If it's from 100 to 499 acre-feet, we have to go up to our next level. Our division level commander has to approve that. And if there's a withdrawal request at 500 acre-feet or more, which is a pretty significant amount of water, that has to go to our headquarters for approval. And so another component of that is that if a state has declared a state of emergency and the governor's made that declaration, the reservoir project manager can approve withdrawals for up to 50 acre-feet of water. So if somebody needs to come and put water in a truck with drums, they can do that sort of thing. And so all that being said, and yeah, there's a lot of text on here, so I'm sorry about that. We have a water supply handbook that kind of further outlines, what we can and can't do. Generally, the Corps takes the approach. We want to be kind of the last resort in terms of water supply with respect to drought emergencies. So, I can see I highlighted here that we generally want to see that local or other state entities or even other federal entities have exhausted all reasonable means for getting water supply first before they come to us and request a temporary water withdrawal permit. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we typically prefer the evaluations, the requests for these withdrawals to be kind of secondary and supplemental to what the state and local folks are already doing. So when we do that, when we're looking at evaluating each individual permit or withdrawal request, we want to make sure that those have already been exhausted and considered. And so, here's some of the things that would be considered prior to us granting a temporary permit. We want to, I guess, check whether or not a declaration of the drought emergency has been made. Make sure that the state and local resources with respect to water supply are being fully utilized. Whether or not water conservation measures have been put in place and prioritization of water availability. And then, understanding that there has been some minimum water demand, minimum requirements put in place to make sure that the public health and welfare are being taken care of. And then, whether or not the water treatment facilities have considered any sort of modification to handle, these low flows or drought conditions. So those are all things that we would consider before granting a permit for temporary withdrawals from any one of the reservoirs. So kind of circling back, again, the Louisville district, we have the authority to permit temporary withdrawals for domestic, municipal, and industrial uses, but not for crop irrigation. So I think that's kind of an important distinction. That's one of the things that is in that permit. It does have the specific conditions of what the withdrawals have to be used for. So, if a request comes to us and that permit request comes to us, it will clearly outline, what the water use is being done for. And in that second highlighted piece there, we will in all likelihood probably charge the user for the water. That's a little bit out of my lane. That kind of typically works through our planning office. And so I'm not 100% sure on the details, but as I mentioned earlier, there is a minimum fee for each permit, and there may be some costs associated for any sort of additional withdrawal. So, and the other thing to note for our projects is that each of our reservoir projects has a drought management plan, And that drought management plan kind of further refines the water supply management measures during drought emergencies. So it kind of lists conditions to consider, enhanced coordination between, local, state, and other federal partners. And so that gets into a little bit more of the specifics about, how much can be withdrawn from each reservoir, and then, in a drought emergency. And so that's something that we would pull up and take a look at in the event that we get into, some sort of emergency drought. So, yeah, I think that was it. And I guess I'll let you guys ask any questions if there are any out there.
Thank you so much, Adam. Great presentations, the second round for sure. Are there any questions? Anybody want to follow up with any of what we just heard this afternoon? Not this afternoon, but this second session. It's always tough doing workshops like this because there's so many people that could have presented on stuff that they're doing. And so certainly want to apologize to anyone that really wanted to share information about stuff that they have going and didn't have the opportunity to. But I did want to provide a couple minutes to folks that say want to pitch what they have offered regarding drought or resources. As Nathaniel pointed out, there's several other members from USDA who are also on this call. If you guys want to say a few more words about what your corner of USDA is doing, or really open it up to anyone who might want to share with the whole group other tools and resources that might be a benefit to us to know.
This is Mike Cox. I'm the state engineer for NRCS, Indianapolis office. The mention was made about the cost share programs and things through NRCS, USDA. I know in 2012, we did offer assistance for programs such as watering facilities, temporary pipeline facilities for livestock watering through the EQIP program. There was some money that was made available through our national office, specifically because of the drought. There was also, I believe, some money also for temporary cover. So as we got more rain, to provide forage for livestock, those kind of things, as we went into the fall to do some seedings and forage for them. So that's probably not comprehensive, but I do know that during drought situations, like Farm Service Agency that was discussed before, there are programs to help livestock and other producers during drought. And a lot of times there will be some additional money that's provided for those practices, for those payments.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, this is Chris Ritz with NRCS. Just to add, Beth, we also work with conservancy districts throughout the state, and there's a handful of conservancy districts. One example in the southeast is like Stucker Fork Conservancy District. They have a water supply network they've already have built into their plan and design that's been around for years. So we work with them and help them try to maintain their existing infrastructure. There's also a handful of water supply dams throughout the state, and maybe someday more will go online. So it's something USDA is evaluating is how to help with water supply needs.
Quiet group is ours. All right, so it's been a while since we've had some fun interaction. So we're gonna bounce over to another Mentimeter question. And you know how I'm gonna look for so many people to enter their stuff. So go pull out your phone or tablet or whatever and go to menti.com, enter in the user code. And this question is, so what tools or information is missing that is making drought early warning difficult? So this could be asking questions from two different directions, such as what tools information are out there that we really didn't hear more about, but it could also be what sort of data information tools have just not been developed yet. That and maybe we all understand that it's going to be very difficult to come up with that tool, but it's important for us to identify that need, because really the more people that say, hey, we need to know exactly when a flash drought's going to start down to the hour, this is where we can trickle that need up the chain and perhaps pursue funding that could fund such a tool. It could help motivate research to look into finding those types of solutions that right now we think might be pie in the sky, but would really make things easier. I'm loving these answers so far because they're right up my alley here. Not that I have the answers, but they are hitting at my heartstrings. So more local input on what they are seeing, local impacts. Yeah, it'd be great to hear more from folks. I think Mike Ryan pointed out that I had put together a survey where once a week I asked all the county extension folks to tell me what's going on in your county so we know, since we can't be all across the state at once. And that's been very helpful. A mesonet, a robust mesonet for that matter, soil moisture network, perhaps with that mesonet or elsewhere. Boots on the ground reporting. So not just from extension folks, but from anyone. And that even ties in with Callie's talk of where there's an impact reporter tool out there, but are people really using it? In Indiana, it seems like we're a little slow to do that this year. Reliable long-term precipitation modeling. Well, that's awkward and yet very appropriate. More accurate drought outlooks. Water use reported below that threshold. A mesonet or a coordinated mesonet. More ground truth reports. Education for sure. Local private water supply issues getting to regional and state decision makers. Okay. So that could tie into, there's a lot of top level people and a lot of, I hate to say low level, but local people will say, and maybe there's a communication disconnect between the high level people and the more local community. So having that information get to everyone. So everyone has buy-in and it feels like they're engaged in decisions. Additional attention paid to global scale teleconnections that support patterns that can lead to local drought. Fascinating. Yeah, we hear so much about things such as El Nino, La Nina, and so teleconnections, but there's probably 5 other relatively popular ones in the climate community, and probably 10 to 15 beyond that are maybe more obscure. And I think we still have not made a lot of progress in understanding what impacts each of those different teleconnection patterns have for Indiana. A simple, widely advertised, user-friendly tool for general public awareness. Well, that's a good point, because we went through a lot of tools today that's kind of for our targeted audience, but is there anything out there for the general public? And social media might be able to leverage that opportunity somewhat, but you don't want to, we need the data, we need the information, but is general public understanding that? Education of what drought is. Yeah, if we could get Trent Ford to do that presentation like once a week to a whole bunch of people, that would be awesome. These are some great ideas, everyone. See, we have input from 15 folks so far. Let's see if we can get a couple more in there, because we really do want to hear from all of you, and your thoughts and opinions really do matter.
And I think people can only submit one. So I guess if you have other ideas, you could put them in the chat box.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sorry about that. Still learning Metameter. Lessons learned. Okay, well, if you think of anything else, by all means, you, I think, can continue to submit that to Mentimeter even once I've stopped sharing. But as Molly pointed out, you can put ideas in the chat. You can always reach out to any of us too that have been on the planning team or involved, and we'll try and archive that to some level in the workshop report. I think then at this point, I want to hand it over to Ryan and Manuela to do the final session of bringing this all together, discussing what we've had and figuring out where to go from here. And then we'll wrap up at the top of the hour with some closing words. Ryan and Manuela?
Thank you, Beth. Ryan and I were amazed at the volume of information that we were able to pack into these 3 days. We started off with a common understanding of what drought is and what we did and did not know. And I'm sure each one of us probably has walked away with something that is, I didn't know that type statement, as well as the impacts in the historical information. We talked a bit about the importance of water and what the Central Indiana Water Study is able to share with us and enlighten us on the uses of water in just the Central Indiana portion, and brings up a lot of questions probably on what the rest of the state looks like if the Central Indiana area has such a giant division in different ways of using water. We talked about planning efforts. What do we already have in place, and what do we need? What could we use? What do other people have that looks really interesting and would work really well for Indiana? Remember, we're not above thieving. We'll just dress it up and make it Indiana. We talked about we went through the exercises and how does or did drought impact us in prior events? And what priorities do we have or should we have for drought? Realizing that some of the things that we have out there currently may not be appropriate for our current needs and desires. So we're always open and available for change and update. How do we reach out to local entities? I think a number of your comments just now talked a little bit more about how do we get information out there to the public? How do we educate others about drought? And what tools are available to us? How can others assist with drought? And what are other people's roles in drought? As you can see, drought is not a single agency or a single person type event. It really needs all of our participation in order to be successfully addressed and to come out more resilient once we've experienced the drought event. So where do we go from here? Ryan, you had a few notes and thoughts.
Thanks, Manuela. I just want to add a very few points to what you just summarized for us. I think the whole workshop has been very encouraging, and really today and on Tuesday during the first session, we learned just about the wealth of what I'll say new data and tools that are available and how those complement what we've been using in the past. So obviously those are things that we really need to utilize and apply these new and advanced tools and data projects and integrate those into our plans at the state level. And then also, the other thing that's very encouraging and hopefully came through in some of the discussions, today and Tuesday were that I think here in Indiana, we really do have close communication and coordination between multiple agencies, different levels of government, and a lot of different stakeholders. We still have more that could be added to this group, but I think we're in a really good spot with our coordination and communication. So with that said, though, there's always room for improvement. And that's where we want to stop talking and listen to what you all as listeners have to say. So any suggestions that you have that could help improve the current state of drought planning in Indiana, response, mitigation, that's really what we want to hear from you over this next 20 to 30 minutes. This is going to be a long 25 minutes. If
I'm going to start picking on people because I know a lot of these folks and I know they've got some thoughts in mind.
Well, I'm going to throw one out there real quick first. So on Tuesday, we talked about the state's water shortage plan that was last updated in 2015. And obviously there have been a lot of advancements since then with the data and tools, but also when we were hearing from Cody, I believe, Indiana's plan is listed as primarily a response plan, and there's really not the response and mitigation element. So I think with the listing and the availability to review other plans from other states, I think there's a lot we could learn and potentially integrate into an updated plan at some point. So I'll just throw that out there as one area of improvement.
Janice, you're a planner. What are your thoughts? Where can we venture out?
Well, I think I made a comment, maybe you didn't realize it was me, but I think I made a comment earlier yesterday that we need to make sure that we have everybody at the table that we need and expand that potentially. And I don't remember who's been on the planning teams up to this point. But include everything we can include, right? Resources, people, all that stuff at the very beginning. And I don't really write drought plans, but in overall planning efforts, we need to just make sure we have those people at the table. So they have a voice too, especially from the local level. And I think I mentioned, even groups like access and functional need groups. I mean, just all community, the whole community approach. And sometimes even from an all hazard standpoint, we mentioned a couple other hazards that some planning goes towards that might fit too.
Excellent comments. Thank you. Travis Goodwin. I told you I was going to start picking on you if you didn't pop up on your own. So Travis, tell us a little bit about what you do and then give us your thoughts.
Well, I'm the Security and Counterterrorism Coordinator for IDEM's Drinking Water Branch, and I was added to the Indiana Drought Work Group maybe, I guess, 2 years ago or close to 2 years ago now. And I'm not a drought specialist or meteorological specialist at all, but I try to act as a liaison between our public water utilities and the other folks in the group. And I also try to push information out to those utilities about drought preparedness and have them keeping an eye on their source water levels in an effort to try to get them both planning and ready to respond to potential droughts in areas of Indiana as best we can. And I kind of agree with Janice. I think more local and public involvement on all levels will hopefully help us in the future if we can accomplish that.
Sally. You're muted, Sally.
I sound so much smarter when I'm muted though. I'm with Indiana University and I'm a hydrogeologist, and so I get to see how academics interact with agencies, and sometimes they're in completely different bubbles. And since I'm down on the Indiana University campus, I hear a lot about the Environmental Resilience Institute, and that's full of a bunch of smart people, and they actually go out across the state and speak with like local municipalities on climate change planning, which seems like a lot of that would overlap with drought planning to me. But they sort of, sometimes academics think they have all the answers, so they don't look outside of their own conceptualization of the issue. So I think this group as convened here seems really frictionless. I don't see a lot of territorialism and that sort of thing. And I think that just keeping our eyes open for other stakeholders that might be able to take some of the work off of our shoulders would be good. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm hoping to make sure I share this group's work with people that I interact with, and make sure that they're not so isolated, let's say. But so just keep the academics in mind, and some of us can actually speak the language and help.
Important point, important point. The question I have for everybody is, who's not at the table, who should be? If we go out and do regional versions of this, who should we bring to the table? Just unmute yourself or type it in the chat.
It's a little bit like the water planning, like these discussions have happened a lot with water planning around the state. The stakeholders are going to change in different regions. So how we actually identify those always the question. But the populations, the population density, the land use, the land managers, the water utilities, the soil types, the geology varies spatially, and so the stakeholders will also vary spatially.
Excellent. And Janice punched in local EMAs, emergency management agencies.
Hey, Manuela, Allison here. So I did have another thought kind of going along with the other everybody has said, potentially a group that we could think about including. I've been thinking about IDHS. We do have our exercise division team. So they go out across the state, work with locals, work with primarily, of course, IDHS, but other state entities, and maybe getting them on board to partner with us. Just since that's something that they do more actively, and maybe get their assistance when we break it down more to the district level too.
Thank you. Dennis Toddy included local ag producers, CCAs for more detailed ag issues. Dennis, let's acronym heavy here. CCAs?
Certified Crop Advisors.
Thank you.
Local ag producers are good, but a lot of those folks were through these certified crop advisors, so they are a good conduit of information back and forth both ways. And then I also added maybe some specialty crop producers, because their interaction is a little bit different sometimes than what you hear from regular row crop producers, because their impacts and issues are somewhat different sometimes.
And that's a very good point, Dennis. And it's a lesson that we as the planning team learned, in that, Beth, was it you or was it Ryan that mentioned something about mint farming in Indiana?
I actually have a story from Indiana that I was down in Hans's area a few years ago, and there was a big watermelon producer at a meeting that I was talking to. There was a picture earlier of 2012 about how bad 2012 was. And he actually said, we love 2012 because they had access to plenty of water, but their disease pressure on their watermelon farm was much lower than any other year. So they actually enjoyed it. Austin just put in livestock producers. Good addition, Austin.
Any other industries outside the ag industry that should be dealt with? Remember that we've got 5 different types of drought that we talked about on Tuesday.
You know, one thing that came up in our breakout group yesterday, the public health component, and I know that I believe Indiana, Mike Sutton, I believe is his name. I don't think he's on, but he's pretty interested in the topic, and so I may be just trying to continue to engage with public health on these issues.
Yeah, I know Mike's role with the Department of Health was a grant-based role. And he was with us on our drought team and had to drop off because his role was no longer funded. So, but that is definitely an important point. Anyone else? Master gardeners and master naturalists for their input. Interesting. Tom, you want to say a little bit more about them?
Like I said in the chat there, it was just one of the first things that popped into my head. And I know that we've worked, especially with master gardeners, in CocoRAS before to recruit them to be CocoRAS observers. And of course, they're very much in tune with what's going on with water supply and how the weather's going. So it would be a good boots on the ground source maybe to let us know what's going on and also to let us know what they need.
Excellent, excellent input. Scott Miner indicated, to what extent are utilities involved? They will be responsible for much of the communication regarding conservation measures. We're not only talking water utilities, but let's remember that some of the other utilities that are water intensive in their use, such as power generation. In 2012, we had some issues where we were looking at some brownouts potentially because of the inability to appropriately cool the turbines. And so that was a challenge that we were facing. So definitely a good one there.
Manuela, I think we need to keep in mind utilities for another reason. Oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but there are times where it's not just lack of water, but heat as well with droughts. And then what are the effects on lack of utilities or rationing resources because of heat as well on the general population beyond? We've talked a lot about agriculture, but what about the effects of lack of utilities on the general population as well in a drought?
Definitely, definitely. It would be great to have a listing of agencies with a brief description of their specialties. So if folks have a need or a question, they can figure out who to ask. Good input. And yes, I think that may be an outcome that we can provide from this event. But one of the main reasons we brought all of you together was because we would really like to be able to get into the regional level, have something similar, and without having your understanding of where things are at and where the needs are at, it makes it really difficult to go to the local level and say, oh, we've got a solution for you or something of that sort, when realistically, we may not know what we don't know at the state levels and at the federal levels and things of that sort. So it's great that we are able to share that information. And as I said, I think with our discussions today and over the last 3 days, we've probably each found something that was an aha moment or a tickler for something that we could do to improve. Dennis?
Yeah, and going back to my previous life as a state climatologist in South Dakota, somebody mentioned media, and one of the things that I think is really useful and helpful, somebody else had mentioned what drought categories are you using, is being able to communicate clearly with people about what drought categories are using, what happens at those drought categories, and what actions and things that will occur at those categories. We did that with the state drought plans in South Dakota. And these get into things kind of called drought triggers as to what happens when certain levels kick in. One of my favorite ones with the city of Sioux Falls, where their triggers for various levels of water restrictions were based on levels in the Big Sioux River, which are reported daily. And you could go look at them on the website and see where it was and know that, okay, if it drops another foot, here's what's going to happen in the way of watering restrictions. So some levels of what's going to happen when drought hits certain categories, so people know what's coming and can be ready to deal with those.
Building off of that, one thing I wanted to mention is that there's a project going on in Ohio right now that's doing that sort of work. And it kind of ties into what I said, I think it was on Tuesday, of using state agency data to better understand the impacts of drought, and then using that information to understand, at various levels, what impacts you typically see. So they are developing a framework with that project. So that's always something, that if it's of interest, that sort of their process methodology could be shared and potentially, replicated in Indiana.
Wonderful. Other thoughts, ideas? You guys are putting lots of things into the text, into the chat. Pre-prepared educational materials, posters, flyers, news releases, catchphrases for conservation. Love the brown is the new green. Cool. The question came up, does anyone have experience writing drinking water utility drought management plans and ordinances? Ryan, you mentioned a ordinance in your part.
Sure. There's a model ordinance in the water shortage plan. I don't have a listing. I think looks like the comment came from Sarah Hudson. Sarah, I don't have a listing of who may have experience here in the department, but I'm sure some of our folks have worked with utilities in the past. So I'll follow up on that. But I'd start with the ordinance just as a template, if nothing else.
Other thoughts, other needs? Then I'm going to throw one last question at everybody. What were you expecting when you joined this conversation? And did you get what you were expecting? Or if not, how did that differ? Mark Bash, I'm going to pick on you.
I had to take my tape off my camera. So, you know what? Actually, this has been great for me, just knowing the different sites that have information that's available, kind of having that summarized. It's certainly, of course, getting together as a group as we do, each week is wonderful. I think that's really important. As I've gone through the declaration of drought warnings in the past, certainly since the water shortage plan was updated, and certainly we had, 2010, we had some warnings for the state, 2012, and, just being kind of prepared for it a little more. And, the meetings that we have really have kind of, I think, help as we walk into this, maybe we're looking at something coming up, this year potentially as dry as things are now. And so I think, having all these tools available and having folks that are familiar with all these tools much more than me will make it so much easier for at least DNR to do their part if indeed we do get into the water shortage plan. And again, in that plan, although, at the time it was put together, the folks that developed it wanted to make certain it was a water shortage plan and not just a drought plan, because there are other reasons why you might have a water shortage, but everybody knew it was more of a drought plan, and certainly that's what it would be used as. So I think, having all this input and knowing where data is available and having people that know where that data is available is going to be very helpful if we, as we step into at least our implementation of the water shortage plan here in Indiana.
Wonderful. Scott Miner, what did you show up here expecting, and did you get what you were expecting, or what did you learn?
Hi. Yeah, I'm with the White River Alliance. We hold the annual Indiana Water Summit. So really, I'm coming to collect information to see how this subject can be brought into that venue. So I've learned quite a bit. There's obviously a ton of coordination already going on. So I'll bring this back to our planning committee, and we'll see how we can be involved using the summit as a venue to get that information out.
Wonderful. That's this is why we do this, is so that we can get these new alliances built and capitalize on alliances that exist that we didn't know necessarily had that linkage.
I see a question in the chat asking when the next summit is. Provisionally, we're looking to October this year. We're going to push that a little bit longer, hoping we can do a little bit more in person, but we will preserve, obviously, the option to do it online like we did last year.
Great. Thank you. Any final comments from my partner in crime, Ryan?
Just that all good things must come to an end, and that I'm going to kick it back to Beth.
All right. Thanks, Manuela and Ryan and all the participants who are willing to help make this a great kickoff meeting. And really it is what it is. It's the start of several more of these workshops. So I've gotten some questions from folks of, hey, how can we get the presentations and contact lists and so forth? And so the planning team is going to meet next week, not just to wrap up and kind of talk about successes and lessons learned from this kickoff meeting, but figure out where we're going to go next. But we'll also probably explore the idea of putting together a workshop website where we could post presentations. So I'll email all the presenters and get their permission and their presentations if they're okay sharing that. We'll probably also have a participant page that will give the names and the emails and the affiliations. So if any of you object to us doing that, please let me know, along with the agenda. And we might even put on that page information we have for the next couple of workshops. So keep an eye out for that. And as I said earlier, we do want to have a few more sub-state workshops. We're looking at June or July, and we really hope that all or many of you will consider attending those so that we are continuing that dialogue between the local level and the state level. I think that's really important to see that everyone is willing to show up in the room and have these conversations together. So think about that, keep an eye out. If you have any ideas or suggestions for how to improve things, please feel free to email me or anyone on the planning committee. I'm going to do a shameless plug. So there's a totally separate workshop that several of us on the planning committee are working on that is an Indiana Climate Services Summit that will be held the mornings of June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So it's another Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday idea. And the theme for this will be climate services for agricultural decision support, agricultural decision making. So if you think that you'd be interested in that, so obviously that will encompass far more than just drought, but it will be targeted more to our agricultural issues. Please send me an email, let me know, hey, you want to at least know more information about that. We hope to send out invitations. I was hoping to this week, and then apparently I had this workshop this week. So maybe next week I'll send out the invitation. So please let me know if you want to be a part of that. And then finally, I want to call out a special thanks to the planning team again, because without all of your input and help and identification of partners and suggestions for an agenda, I don't think that this workshop would have been as successful as it is. So again, that's Ryan Mueller, Manuela Johnson, David Smith, Molly Willison. We had Hans helping out with all of the technology of this and providing insight, and then myself. And finally, I want to do a special thanks to Molly and Nidus and the Midwest Drought Early Warning System, because they were the key sponsor for hosting this workshop. So before I say and wave goodbye to everyone, I want to hand it over to Molly now for some final words. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you. I mean, this has been a great workshop, and it's really exciting, everything that's going on in Indiana, from the, climate services team that's at the state level, the drought weekly meetings. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff going on. So I'm excited to see things move forward, and hopefully, be able to share more broadly some of the activities going on in Indiana with other Midwest states, kind of as a showcase of, the right way to do things. So this has been great. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Molly. So with that, I'm going to wish everyone a good rest of the day, rest of the week. Have a great weekend. I know rain is happening across the area, so maybe that will get us out of drought in the northern part of the state. That would be a fun thing to have come out of this workshop. And stay tuned, and please always feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. Thanks again, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, thank you.